And now we'll proceed to our session, and our first session in the conference is titled A Minority Within Its Cultural Surrounding. And this session is dealing with 3 geographic areas. It's dealing with North America, first of all in Europe, and then in North America, and then in in Central Asia. And in all 3 areas, we're going to deal with different groups, and as a matter of fact, we're going to deal with Jews and Christians, and also with Muslims. So we have like an umbrella of 3 geographic zones and 3 religions in this session. I'm going to, it's going to be like really a nice opening for our conference. Our first speaker in this session is our guest speaker, Professor Merion Kaplan, who came all the way from freezing New York to sunny Tel Aviv, and really sunny Ra'anana, even though it's going to rain, it seems, but it's a lot better, I think, than what's going on now in New York. And Merion Kaplan is the Skirball Professor of Modern Jewish History at NYU. Her research focuses on Jewish life in Germany and on Jewish women's history. Her research is remarkable by its subtle use of archival material, among which are diverse documents that express feelings and personal perspectives relating to social developments and daily routine. Merion has published extensively, and I'm not going to read the list of her publications, which is so long, but I'll mention only a few. One of them is The Making of the Jewish Middle Class, Women, Family, and Identity in Imperial Germany, published in New York, Oxford University Press, 1991, and it was later translated into Hebrew, מגדר, מעמד ומשפחה, צמיחתה של הבורגנות היהודית בגרמניה הקיסרית, was published by Zalman Shazar publication in 2012. And another publication, another book, is Between Dignity and Despair, Jewish Life in Nazi Germany, 1998, also published by Oxford University Press. And another publication, Gender and Jewish History, together with Deborah Dash Moore, Indiana, 2011. I mentioned them, I could mention so many others, but all of these 3 books, for all of them, Merion Kaplan won the National Jewish Book Award. And we're really honored to have such a distinguished scholar opening our conference today. And I'm inviting Merion Kaplan for her talk, to give her talk, titled Looking at the German in German Jewish Families, 1871-1918.
Thank you for that very nice introduction. So we're going to look at the German in German Jewish families. How did Jews, about 1% of the German population, do people have the copy of this? Some people have the copy of this? Okay, so you can share with your neighbors. Sometimes it's easier to read and follow along as I'm speaking. How did Jews, about 1% of the German population in 1871, or about 500,000 people that grew to 615,000 by 1910, adapt to their German environment? How did they adapt sometimes, refrain other times, and create a fluid German and Jewish, or German-Jewish identity? Another way of thinking about this is wondering about the Jewish, German, and also Christian aspects of their profiles. To begin, let's take a look at some of the differences between the Jewish population and the general German population. Jews were ahead of other Germans in terms of family size. Jews had fewer children than others, limiting their fertility to about 2 children so that By the first decade of the 20th century, the Jewish birth rate in Germany's biggest state, Prussia, was only half that of the general population. Late marriages automatically limited family size, and Jews postponed their unions longer than other Germans in order to establish businesses and some security before they married. Commercially successful, most Jews had risen to the middle classes, again ahead of most Germans who were engaged in agriculture and industry. This raised Jewish standards of living, allowing Jewish women to devote themselves to child rearing, homemaking, and the increasing duties of class representation, such as dinner parties, social calls, and home decoration. With fewer children to support, Jewish families could also focus on advanced education for sons and even daughters. More on that in a minute. While some of the differences between Jewish and non-Jewish families can be explained by class, other differences relate to Jews' concentration in urban areas. Historically forced to cede agriculture and crafts to Christians, Jews were hardly interested in becoming peasants and artisans when commerce and industry caught on in Germany. Jews fled the countryside for careers and educational opportunities in the cities. In constant flux, they moved from village to towns to cities, and unlike many Germans, generally moved in family units, not as individuals. This instability, too, may have caused many of them to limit family size. Berlin especially attracted over a quarter of all Jews by 1910. Almost 60% of Jews lived in cities over 100,000, also by 1910. This overview highlights differences in the Jewish and non-Jewish populations, particularly comparing middle classes. Now let's turn to some of the German influences on the Jewish environment. Legal emancipation in 1871, is it too loud? Sorry. Financial success and the benefits of urban life were only halfway measures, since Jews wanted acceptance into bourgeois society, their pathway, they hoped, to acculturate and to acceptance as Germans. To become part of a German folk, a separate people and or nation identifying with ancient Germans, a Germanic soul, and a nationalism verging on a racial community, was impossible. A bourgeois lifestyle was tangible and achievable. So Jews not only internalized the cultural standards of the bourgeoisie, but also admired and promoted many of its values. But they did not just imitate. More specifically, on the one hand, urban Jews tried to adapt to the lifestyle of the old, non-capitalist, civil service-oriented, educated upper middle class. They sought solid respectability and the hope for a bright future for their children. On the other hand, by the very nature of their commercial rather than civil service or professional identities, Jews also realized a more consumer-oriented, fashionable aspect, seen by more conservative Germans and even some Jews as nouveau riche. Culture, especially a cultured family and well-brought-up children, became a defining character of class and of middle-class Germanness. Jews adapted with happiness and alacrity to the reigning German idea of Bildung. Bildung is going to come up a lot in this talk. Bildung as education, self-development, and gentility. It's not just education. If you're educated and you're a boor, then you're not gebildet, all right? You have to be genteel as well. This was probably one of the most important influences that the German middle class exerted on Jews just entering that economic station. One can argue that Jews were familiar with study and with learning, but Bildung was more than that. It was manners, cultivation, and respectability. Jews hoped to acquire enough Bildung to be accepted as part of the German middle class. Male Jews could acquire Bildung by adopting the German intellectual and scholarly traditions of the 19th century. They clung to this version of Bildung long after German nationalists had distorted it. This educational and intellectual version of Bildung left women out, since women could not enter universities until 1908. Nevertheless, after 1908, Jewish women and Jewish men, both benefiting from their parents' middle-class status, attended universities in far greater proportions than their size in the population. By 1913, for example, although 1% of the German population, Jewish women made up 12.9% of women at the universities and 22% or 21.7% of women studying in Berlin. Jewish men made up 6% of the university population in 1913, although their numbers were greater than that of their female co-religionists. With or without higher education, and most Jewish women had a good girls' high school education, generally to the age of 16, women took part in the cultural and familial side of Bildung, a term that also meant a family of manners and good breeding. Women were to raise such families. This Bildung represented respectability and was as important to the advancement of the Jewish middle class as the education of men. Culture did not begin and end with the universities, but with a model home life, a model family. Women were central to this tranquility and steadiness of this family incarnation of Bildung. First, let's turn to child rearing and family customs. Jews allowed German bourgeois modes to penetrate intimate familial relationships as well as the atmosphere of their homes, permitting signs of Jewish acculturation to flow outside. They taught their children to look, speak, and act like other Germans. Mothers were to maintain a household Germanic in its cleanliness and orderliness, values high on the list of the German bourgeoisie and the German state. These would produce hardworking and orderly citizens. Also, parents mediated between German culture in the form of music, literature, and social engagements and the family. Mothers took on the responsibility of the behavior and culture of their children, imparting Bildung. Bourgeois customs and Bildung. Relatives, grandmothers, unmarried sisters, and maiden aunts, along with the mother, and for wealthier families, the nanny, took active part in child rearing. Some lived with the families, others came for extended visits. In the early years of the empire, when some mothers worked still in the family shops and did housekeeping, they divided their time between both. But by the third decade of the imperial era, most Jewish middle-class women saw child rearing as their primary function. And just as they began to do this, the sentimentalization of the mother-child dyad in advice literature and popular ideology reached its height in the surrounding German culture. Motherhood, that shifting cluster of ideas and behaviors, was being redefined and offered women social power as socializers of children, whereas previous generations had been helpmates in the business and mothers. It appears that Jewish mothers transmitted German manners and behavior, but they also may have had more power in the family than non-Jewish women of their class. Jewish fathers remained absorbed in business and commercial travels or long shop hours. Their absence was noticeable. Non-Jews of the same class, many of whom held civil service posts, spent more time at home and had more opportunity to enforce their domestic authority. Also, non-Jewish men, more secure in their careers, may have been less dependent upon wives' help and cooperation. Additionally, Jewish men confronted an often anti-Semitic world, and they themselves needed support in the home, bartering some authority in exchange for peace and friendship. Others found household and children's issues bothersome. Freud, for example, wrote to his fiancée, quote, "I will let you rule the house as much as you wish, and you will reward me with your sweet love and by rising above all those weaknesses for which women are so often despised." Great quote. Unlike the German tyrant husband, father, whose children feared him, Jewish homes may have been the opposite, the strict mother and mild father. Rural observers, for example, noted that Jewish women raised the children and in general had a more respected and independent position than their non-Jewish counterparts. Mothers imparted German favorites to their children, from folk tales and fairy tales to better literature. Many families read aloud, a favorite form of entertainment before radios or record players. The great German writers, Schiller, Goethe, and Lessing, as well as the Jewish converted poet Heinrich Heine, were family favorites. Some families read more popular magazines and writers like Theodor Fontane, and one woman noted that she learned about German bourgeois style and culture from these sources. As to toys and games, most Jewish children enjoyed the same as other German children, except at Hanukkah and Purim, when they played special games. Children played with sex-segregated toys, boys with toy soldiers, with drums, toy horses and trains, and girls with household miniatures and dolls. Often mothers taught the children piano or hired music teachers. Teaching manners to children had similar and different valences from non-Jews. Both groups tried to show that they were above the lower classes in their bearing and cultivation. Yet trying to fit into the German bourgeoisie meant that Jewish children had an extra burden. They were also taught good tone to distinguish themselves from the lower classes and from anti-Semitic stereotypes of unruly Jews. Anti-Semites depicted Eastern European Jewish children, but by implication all Jewish children, as noisy, dirty, undisciplined, unhealthy, unathletic, and unmannerly, not gebildet. They were quick to hurl, just like in a synagogue, or Jewish haste in their disdain, and Jews were eager to show their own calm, quiet, and mannerly bearing. Again, like most non-Jewish mothers, Jews read German child-rearing books and encouraged their children to engage in gymnastics, hiking, swimming, ice skating, and taking long walks, reminding children of their posture and demeanor. But again, there was an extra emphasis among Jewish families. In Imperial Germany, health was equated with patriotism, and Jews strove to achieve the standards set by their society. They also tried to appear robust and strong in contrast to the weak stereotype that anti-Semites foisted on them. And some Jews believed that their children needed to be hardy, since, quote, who has more reason than we Jews to accustom our children to privation? Patriotism extended to clothing, as mothers dressed their children in outfits imitating the emperor's family. They viewed military parades, placed candles in their windows in honor of the emperor's birthday, and recited poems about him. In this way, Jewish children had very similar bourgeois training as non-Jews. Still, Jewish children received an extra message that Jews in particular had reasons to be grateful to the emperor. As one Jewish children's journal put it, the emperor's heart envelops all his subjects with equal love, without regarding religious differences. Their love of the emperor was, quote, not despite, but because we are Jews. We are faithful and upright Germans. Jewish and non-Jewish families tended to be very strict with their children, yet in the later decades of the 19th century, some began to accept the idea of childhood and the individuality of children and modified child rearing a bit. Memoirs suggest that while Jewish parents tended to be strict, they may have been less so than non-Jewish counterparts. One woman remembered that her non-Jewish friends preferred to come to her home, quote, where nothing was forbidden. There was no doubt that it was 100 times nicer at our home, she wrote. One reads nowhere of the physical constraints that some German parents placed on their children, or the corporal punishment meted out to them. This is still a hypothesis, but I suspect that Jewish parents were less strict and possibly more affectionate, perhaps in an attempt to shield their offspring from what they perceived as an unfriendly environment. They provided more solace at home. Besides their education, good health, and good manners, Jews embedded their claim to Germanness in family life. To be a middle-class family was essential to their Jewish identity and to their German identity. Moritz Oppenheim's paintings of Jewish family life, very popular among German Jews, evoked cozy family scenes, combining Jewish life and German patriotism. Jews believed their own respectable families to be at one with other Germans. These families, with well-behaved children wearing little imperial outfits, looked, and to a large extent felt, German. Villages and small towns, where about 30% of Jews still lived in 1910, presented different challenges regarding the Christian environment. Villagers saw neighborliness, pleasant, informal contacts as a social duty, even a social necessity. Male neighbors met in beer gardens, volunteer fire departments, and sharpshooting clubs. Women met in shops and often helped each other out. And non-Jewish children helped observant Jews turn on lights and heating on the Sabbath, for which they received candies or small gifts. On special holidays, Jews and non-Jews exchanged food, like matzot and Easter eggs. Funerals, much like sick calls, occasioned a communal spirit, and Jews and Christians attended one another's funeral processions, sometimes even the graveside rituals. Although village neighbors rarely visited each other's homes, in general this was not done. Public mixing of Jews and non-Jews, both male and female, took place at the annual church festivals and the veterans' balls. But Jews too held public religious festivals, like Purim parades through the villages, or built sukkahs for neighbors to see. Comfortable with their acculturation to German mores and culture, urban Jews found that two Christian elements, the nanny and the Christmas tree, presented different kinds of challenges. And now I'm moving just from general German culture to Christian culture. Not all German culture is Christian, so this is specifically Christian now. A Christian world, its symbols and holidays, surrounded and penetrated the Jewish milieu. Jewish children learned Christian stories and songs in public school, and Jewish adults had to close their shops on the Christian day of rest. Many experienced firsthand contact with Christian belief and practice through Christian nannies and household help. Children understood that their nannies favored Christianity. The later novelist Jakob Wassermann's nanny hugged him and said, quote, "You have a Christian heart." At the same moment he felt her love, her words frightened him because they demeaned his Jewishness. Another child's nanny explained that she went to confession in church because of her sin, serving Jews. Nannies could also terrify children with Christian folk tales. Domestics often familiarized their charges with Christianity. When the daughter of a rabbi begged to be brought to church just once, her caretaker complied. Another child preferred her nanny's mysterious church services to the, quote, boring synagogue equivalent. Sometimes Jewish children learned Christian bedtime prayers without realizing the origin of the rhymes. Usually words about Christ had been changed to more neutral ones about heaven. And I have to just add here that I learned a nighttime prayer from my grandmother from Germany, and forever I didn't know it was a Christian prayer either, because it was, and my grandmother was Orthodox. It was changed. It was just about heaven and about guardian angel, but I didn't know what a guardian angel, what religion a guardian angel had. So this was very common. Household help also introduced Christmas to Jewish families, as Christmas became the central German bourgeois family celebration, replete with gifts and with its original religious meaning diminished. The Christmas tree made its entree into a number of Jewish homes. Memoirs illustrate families that eschewed a tree but exchanged presents on Christmas. Those who had a Christmas tree, quote, for the help, but still celebrated Hanukkah, and those who celebrated Christmas with a tree and gifts, but devoid of Christ. Jews in the last group, who displayed trees, did not always make the transition easily. Some families first pretended to buy them, quote, for the servants, and only later admitted to their own pleasure. Some also distributed gifts for servants, relatives, and friends, and sang Silent Night, quote, for the servants. Still, it should be remembered that some servants were like family and were included in the children's prayers. Also, they rarely referred to the tree as a Christbaum, Christ tree, but as a tree with light, Lichterbaum. Theodor Herzl, the father of Zionism, did not care what label he used for his tree. Quote, as far as I'm concerned, they can call it the Hanukkah tree. Most Jews who erected trees stripped it of its Christian symbolism and instead conflated their tree with Germanness. One woman recalled a German holiday, a northern winter festival. Gershom Scholem's family also joined in a German folk festival as Germans and sang carols until the emerging young Zionists refused to participate in 1911. What kind of self-understanding did such Jews have? Some were quite removed from religious practice, yet more observant families who may have spent Passover with Orthodox grandparents considered Christmas a major family holiday. One father who said prayer after every meal set up his first tree in 1900. Conversely, not having a tree did not automatically mean religiosity. Many a 3-day Jew, does everybody know what a 3-day Jew is? Oh, okay, 3-day Jew is somebody who goes to synagogue only on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And in German, it was called a Dreitagesjude, a 3-day Jew, and in America, it's a 3-day Jew. So I thought you might know, but okay, those who know America know 3-day Jews. Okay, so many a 3-day Jew rejected a tree. For most Jews, Judaism became a mélange of rituals to be observed or neglected. But for most Jews, the Christmas tree was a taboo. Those who did generally came from secular, urban, bourgeois circles. Even when they rejected trees, German Jews found themselves engulfed in Christmas. They had Christmas pageants at school and walked through local Christmas markets. In one small town in South Germany, the Jewish children dressed as angels for the Christmas play, and their mothers attended the event. These parents, whose own Judaism was deep-seated, did not fear that their, quote, Jewish angels would be negatively influenced by the Christian milieu. Similarly, in Bavaria, Jewish children in a Catholic daycare center enjoyed receiving candies from St. Nicholas. The nuns carefully chose roles like that of King David for the Jewish children, intending not to offend the parents. Christmas markets with toys, cakes, gingerbread men, decorations, and pine trees attracted the children too. But I would argue that the majority of Jews lived amidst Christians and Christian symbols, the tree being the most significant, acknowledging these symbols and even enjoying them without giving up Judaism. The nanny and the Christmas tree were rarely the cause of a final break with Judaism. So the next question how were Jews Jewish in Imperial Germany? I've just discussed the permeability of boundaries between Jewish and Christian cultures. Now I will address the relative impermeability of the boundaries between German Jewish culture and German society. What I think I will show is that even as Jews strove for integration, they maintained a firm sense of identity, specifically within the family and community. First and importantly, Bildung was not just Germanness, but Jews also saw it as part of their Jewishness, of their German Jewishness. For example, Bildung blended with Jewish traditions of learning and an appreciation of German language, literature, and etiquette. The Jewish family, albeit a cultivated middle-class one, was also an essential part of being Jewish. It was often an extension of religious life and increasingly a substitute for it. A comfortable family life of Bildung represented both Germanness and Jewishness. Jews saw no contradiction between their Germanness and their Jewishness. To exemplify an educated and cultivated family was both German and Jewish. Secondly, sentiments and perceptions also separated Jews from other Germans. In particular, Jews celebrated different holidays and life cycle events and disliked conversion and intermarriage, although both increased in this period, with Jewish men leading the way. Although Christians often excluded them based on their own holidays, customs, and prejudices, Jews too had an emotional affinity with each other, which drew them together and tended to exclude Gentiles. Moreover, Judaism continued in the home and family, in the private sphere. And third, most social life circled on the family and on the broader Jewish community. Religious belief gave way to familial traditions and emotional belonging to a broader Jewish community. Although the Jewish community encompassed, besides its synagogues, myriad clubs, youth groups, social services, self-defense, and philanthropic networks, all of which welcomed volunteers or hired professionals. Here I will focus on domestic Judaism, the family, as a site for the retention of Jewishness, even within an overwhelmingly Christian environment. But, Sienna, I don't want to run over. How much time do I still have? How much time do I still have? Okay. Jewish leaders pointed to the family as crucial in fostering Judaism as synagogue attendance declined in the 19th century. Families mediated Judaism on a daily personal basis. What parents gave their children wasn't religiosity nor knowledge, but their lived lives. This meant that men and women passed on gender traditions deeply embedded in Judaism, Women focused on the home while men counted in public. I'm going to skip some paragraphs. The family provided a critical location for Jewish observance, similar to many Christian families in which the family honored Christian holidays as a way of celebrating itself. Many Jews experienced the Sabbath and holidays as familial celebrations, often around the table. In the 1880s, a Berlin woman recalled a strict commandment of family togetherness on Friday nights. Other families gathered on Friday evenings without any rituals at all, but the two elements, family meals and religion ethnicity, cannot be disentangled. As Jews minimized religious content, these family holidays provided a way of reaffirming the family and its group heritage. The family became a cornerstone of a more secular version of Judaism, what George Mossey called the embourgeoisement of Jewish piety. And then I talk a little bit about life cycle events, which also bring the family together, and also extended family that provided some Jewish ritual, especially people who lived in the villages, who provided Jewish ritual to the city nieces and nephews or grandchildren. So then I talk a little bit about that. And the importance of food as a symbolic, cultural, familial Judaism. Now I'm on page 16 for those of you who have it. Still, there was extraordinary diversity among Jews. Even in the same small community, for example, all Jews prayed together, but they could only afford one synagogue, so differences remained. Sometimes they were in the form of very religious, not especially religious, and not so kosher. Also, differences between male and female observance and among Jews in general, notwithstanding, each succeeding generation practiced ever fewer rituals. Although in rare cases a child may take up religion or Zionism and become more Jewishly identified than her parents, in general the reverse was true. In an Eastern European immigrant family, for example, one woman whose sisters all acceded to marriages arranged by their Orthodox father, a rabbi, broke from her family to become a communist and choose her own partners. In addition, birth rates declined among liberal and Orthodox Jews, an indication that many were using birth control despite religious teachings against it. And my final point here is, did anti-Semitism play a role in the Germanness and Jewishness of families? The answer here is, of course. It was endemic, sometimes epidemic, but not a major impediment. As already mentioned, mothers were to bring up genteel children so as not to attract the attention of anti-Semites, who would hurl insults about Jews' unruly natures. In addition, Jews may have limited family size, not only to secure themselves economically, but because German bourgeois society considered large families disorderly, and anti-Semites disdained large Eastern European Jewish families. Families routinely avoided anti-Semitic schools, neighborhoods, and vacation resorts. Jewish women may also have dressed with, quote, understatement, to signify their solid middle class and non-arriviste position, as well as their perceptions that many Germans attacked modern fashion as something foreign and Jewish. Anti-Semitism additionally affected career choices, since Jews could find more prospects in business and among other Jews, rather than in the civil service, military, or judiciary. Crucially, Jewish mobility took place in a nation that had never answered its Jewish question, whether or how Jews would be integrated into the society, even after emancipation. And the period from 1873 through the early 90s saw renewed political anti-Semitism and social anti-Semitism that grew out of the Great Depression of those years. In fact, conversion and intermarriage were closely related to waves of anti-Semitism, and then I just give some statistics which I will pass over. Still, we may not read history backwards. It is important to trace receptivity as well as hostility to Jews. Their striking successes in terms of education, integration, and economic mobility. Jews assumed a certain minimum of anti-Semitism. Thus, they took anti-Semitism for granted and overcame it. seen through these lenses rather than the Shoah, provides an example of Jewish successes, failures, hopes, and fears. I think I'm going to stop here, even though I have a conclusion. I don't want to run over. I can run for another 2 minutes? Okay. Finally, what does this information tell us about late 19th century Judaism and the Jewish family? By the late 19th century, Jewish religious behavior spanned a vast spectrum. Most Jews practiced an individualistic religiosity. They found a comfort zone somewhere between tradition and Bildung, between conformity to ancient customs and openness to new forms of Jewish life. Judaism was no longer what one did in synagogue, but the myriad private and public ways in which one connected to tradition, family, and community. Older beliefs blended with Bildung, behavior focused on the family, and belonging meant voluntary Jewish organizations. Thus, Jews expanded and revised Judaism, their beliefs, behaviors, and belonging, transforming old traditions into modern practice. Situated within an overwhelmingly Christian environment, Jews adapted their customs, many focusing on, in addition to Jewish organizations and communal bonds, the family. The family evolved from a site for domestic religious practice to a surrogate for religion itself, providing the most intimate link to Jewish values and traditions. Further, family adherence to Bildung provided a secular frame in which Jewish tradition lived on. Hannah Arendt noted, quote, "In the preservation of the Jewish people, the family had played a far greater role than in any Western political or social body, except the nobility. Family ties were among the most potent and stubborn elements with which the Jewish people resisted assimilation and dissolution. Placed in foreign cultures amidst different religions, Jews looked toward the family to provide the roots and security they often lacked. We have yet to discover the degree to which the centrality of the Jewish family was a result of internal or external circumstances. Internal circumstances included religious and cultural traditions and a positive group identity. External circumstances encompass class status and economic necessity, the pressures of anti-Semitism, and the high moral value placed on family life by the German non-Jewish bourgeoisie. What is clear is that the family as symbol was very important to all Jews, simultaneously proclaiming their Jewishness and their Germanness." Thank you for your time.